Hi everyone, this is ABW506D Data Storytelling and Data Visualization presentation for Group 21. Our topic will be the economic ripple effect of US-Iran escalations in the Strait of Hormuz on Malaysia's aviation industry. So this is our team where you can find our team members' name, matrix number, and our email address. Next will be the project outline. This project will be separated into four sections. First, the introduction, following by the data source of the reports, five business questions, and lastly, the recommendation. Let me start with the introduction and the background of our study. During March 2026, US-Iran military conflict severely disrupted the Strait of Hormuz, which is a vital checkpoint that handling roughly 20% of the global crude oil supply. And this has triggered a massive energy shortage and caused Brent crude price to skyrocket. So although this crisis is geographically distant from Malaysia, it has sent a powerful macroeconomic shockwave through Malaysia's economy by weakening the Malaysian ringgit, drawing up operating costs for the local businesses, and accelerated the Malaysia CPI. To uncover the true depth of this vulnerability, our study utilized a custom-built timeline from 2017 to 2026 to visually map how this global upstream supply shock impacted the businesses in Malaysia. So after that will be our section 2, the data source. We downloaded our data from the Department of Statistics Malaysia, Bureau of Transportation Statistics, Macrotrends, and Bank Negara Malaysia. And next will be the research question which will be presented by our team member Shirley.
Hi, I'm Shirley, and now I'm going to talk about the research questions. Our team developed 5 questions for this report. First, to what extent do Malaysian ringgit per US dollar exchange rates fluctuation influences jet fuel prices in Malaysia? Second, how do drops in global crude oil supply affect jet fuel prices? Third, can jet fuel prices act as an early warning signal for inflation in Malaysia? Fourth, for what is the relationship between supply flow and Malaysia's CPI? And lastly, how do fuel supply disruption influence Malaysia's gross domestic products, especially the tourism sector? Moving on to the first questions, this section determines whether currency fluctuations influence fuel price in Malaysia. First of all, we can see that the average exchange rate is at 4 ringgit and 32 cents per US dollar, and average fuel price is at $2.19. The strongest Malaysian ringgit was recorded in quarter 1 year 2021, while the weakest Malaysian ringgit occurred in quarter 2 year 2024. So from the line graph, we can see that during COVID-19 pandemic in year 2020, Brent crude price and fuel price fell to its lowest point. Malaysian ringgit also weakened. However, following the economic recovery in year 2021 and the Russian-Ukraine conflict in year 2022, fuel prices spiked sharply due to supply disruptions and increased global energy demand. The Malaysian ringgit also weakened during this period. Now move to the correlation coefficient. The correlation coefficient of 0.64 between exchange rate and fuel prices indicates a moderately strong positive relationships, which then further supported by the scatter plot showing an upward trend. Similarly, the correlation between Brent crude oil prices and fuel prices is 0.61, which is also moderately strong positive relationship. This indicates that both exchange rates and crude oil prices contribute significantly to fuel price movements. Next, we analyzed the jet fuel price in Malaysian ringgit and found that fuel costs increased substantially during year 2022 and 2023. The weaker Malaysian ringgit amplified the impact by making imported fuel more expensive in local currency terms. As a result, businesses experienced higher operating expenses even when international fuel price began to moderate. And lastly, we analyzed the jet fuel price year-on-year percentage change and found that the most significant increase occurred during year 2021 and 2022, with an increase of around 70 to 90%. This coincided with post-pandemic economic recovery and geopolitical tension that disrupted global energy supplies. From year 2023 onwards, fuel prices experienced negative growth rates, suggesting a gradual normalization of energy markets. So from this analysis, we can conclude that the fuel price fluctuations in Malaysia are influenced by both international crude oil prices and the exchange rate movements. Then I will pass to Li Ming for the research question 2.
Hi everyone, my name is Li Ming and I will continue with business question 3.2. How do drops in global crude oil supply affect jet fuel prices? We can conclude the findings into four phases. First, the COVID-19 demand shock. As global lockdowns were implemented, travel demands collapsed essentially overnight. Because oil production couldn't be shut down fast enough, this created a massive market oversupply. It drove both crude and jet fuel prices to historical low, which temporarily broke the standard economics law of supply and price. Second, the post-pandemic and war shock. After the lockdowns lifted, we saw a massive surge in revenge travel. However, just as aviation demand skyrocketed, the Russia-Ukraine war sanction hits the market. This combination of surging consumer demand and restricted supply had drive up the fuel price. Thirdly, market normalization. From 2023 to 2025, the market finally found its balance. As global supply chains recovered and crude production volume steadily climbed, both fuel price corrected downwards. Lastly, the 2026 Hormuz supply shock. This brings us to the core focus of our study. With consumer travel demands now fully stable, the recent Strait of Hormuz blockage triggered a pure supply shock. Because airlines still need fuel to operate, this sudden scarcity caused aggressive, immediate spike in both Brent oil and jet fuel price. So to summarize, these visuals confirm a clear inverse relation between global supply and fuel price. However, it is critical to note that a massive demand shock like the COVID-19 pandemic will temporarily break this rule. Thank you.
Hi, I'm HT. In this section, I will show you why the price of jet fuel today is our most powerful 6-month early warning signal for Malaysia transport inflation. And this is definitely an opportunity window for a business to get ahead of our competitors before the pressure arrives. Our Power BI analysis of Malaysia's CPI data from 2019 to 2026 tell us two clear indicators. First, a Pearson correlation analysis confirmed jet fuel leads transport CPI with its strongest signals at lag 2, meaning 6 months ahead. Second, for every single $1 USD rise in jet fuel price, Malaysia transport CPI increased by 5.8 index point. This is the direct, measurable, and plannable relationship. And right now, the signal is even flashing. Jet fuel price has shot up to 3.95 per gallon in Q2 2026, which is the highest level since 2022 spike. Based on our model, transport CPI pressure is hitting our way, expected to be coming in Q3 and Q4 2026. The window for us to act is narrowing. Therefore, 3 actions for the leaders to take today. 1. Track fuel jet price as our 6-month forwards indicators, not CPI. And second, lock in the fuel contracts now before Q3 and Q4. And the last one is build a fuel sub struggle at USD 3.5 per gallon into our client's agreement. Based on today's data point, the faster we act, the chances for us to win will be brighter. Thank you.
Hi everyone, I'm Ian Shai, and my business question is what is the relationship between supply flow and Malaysia's Consumer Price Index or CPI? So the Straits of Hormuz is one of the world's most important oil transportation routes. Any disruption to supply flow can affect the fuel prices, transportation costs, and ultimately inflation in Malaysia. Looking at figure 4.1, we can see that the Hormuz supply flow declined significantly from approximately 84 units in 2019 to 74 units in 2020, before gradually recovering to around 87 units by 2024. However, the Malaysia CPI continued to increase from around 480 in 2020 to nearly 540 in 2025. This indicates that the inflationary pressure remained elevated despite improving supply conditions. Moving to figure 4.2, the Brent crude oil prices increased sharply from approximately USD 160 in 2020 to over USD 400 in 2022. Higher oil prices lead to increased aviation fuel, transportation, and also logistic costs. These higher operating costs will eventually pass on to the consumers, contributing to rising inflation. Next, figure 4.3 shows that the relationship between Hormuz supply flow and Malaysia's CPI. Although the supply flow recovered after 2020, but the CPI continued to rise. This suggests that the supply recovery alone was not enough to reduce the inflation, as fuel price volatility and the transportation costs remain significant drivers of inflationary pressure. In summary, although supply flow recovered approximately 17.6% between 2020 and 2024, but the Malaysia CPI still increased by about 12.5% between 2020 and 2025. This indicates that the supply recovery alone was insufficient to reduce the inflation. as fuel price volatility and transportation costs remain significant drivers of Malaysia's CPI. And thank you.
Hi, I'm Lam Hui Shan. I will now talk about the last business question, which is how do fuel supply disruption influence Malaysia's GDP, especially tourism sector. Any disruption in the Straits of Hormuz, being one of the most important air transportation route, can significantly affect global fuel prices, transportation costs, and economic activities worldwide. The tourism and tourism sector are among the sectors most affected by fuel supply disruption, because fuel represents one of the largest operating costs for airlines and transportation service. Increase in fuel price can lead to higher airfare, reduced tourist arrival, and lower tourism spending, which may ultimately affect Malaysia's GDP. Based on the first graph, the decrease in Hormuz supply flow is associated with an increase in jet fuel price. In the beginning of 2026, the supply flow dropped sharply, while the jet fuel price increased from USD 2.12 to USD 2.6. This demonstrates that disruption in global fuel supply chain can significantly affect aviation fuel costs. Fuel, often the largest component of airline operating costs. Rising fuel price increases airline operating expenses and may force airlines to raise air ticket prices or reduce flight frequencies. Based on the second graph, while fuel price increases, airline and transportation provider often increase fares to cover higher operating costs. As a result, travel becomes more expensive for both domestic and international tourists. The number of tourists decreased significantly during period of weaker supply flow, particularly around 2020 and 2021, which is the COVID-19 period, and again in 2026. This shows that fuel supply disruption indirectly reduces tourism demand. As mentioned, tourism is an important contributor to the economy of Malaysia. A reduction in tourist arrival can negatively affect hotels, restaurants, transportation service, retail business, and employment opportunity within the tourism sector. Based on the third graph, the GDP of Malaysia shows an increasing trend after COVID-19 recovery from 2020 to 2025, reaching the highest GPT value of 272,000 in Q4 of 2025. However, period of supply disruption correspond with lower economic growth and fluctuation in GDP performance. This indicates that although Malaysia's economy remains relatively resilient, fuel supply disruption still influence economic performance through higher transportation costs, inflation, and reduced tourism activity. Since the tourism industry contributes significantly to GDP, instability in this sector can affect national economic growth. In the summary, disruption in the Hormuz supply flow can lead to higher fuel jet price and lower tourism arrivals, which negatively affect Malaysia's GDP growth and tourism industry performance. Here are some of the recommendations to tackle this fuel crisis. The first one is to implement currency risk management strategies, like purchasing forward contracts or foreign exchange hedging. This is to reduce exposure to sudden exchange rate fluctuation and provide greater cost certainty for budgeting and financial planning. The next recommendation is that airline to optimize schedules by grounding older aircraft and consolidating underbooked routes during fuel crises to maximize passenger load factor and reduce network fuel burn without losing ticket revenue. This acts as the most direct defense against volatility fuel price spike. The next recommendation is to make supply chain tougher by diversifying supply sources and beefing up inventory management. This would help the country to depend less on risky external routes. Airline and logistic firms can also use fuel hedging to protect against quick price drop. Lastly, the government can invest in public transport infrastructure like electric buses to improve intercity transport system and sustainability mobility solution. Better transportation accessibility make local tourism destination more attractive and affordable for travelers while supporting long-term environmental and economical sustainability. In short, the disruption of Hormuz supply flow due to the recent US-Iran war significantly affects the overall economic performance of Malaysia. Reduction in crude oil supply leads to higher jet fuel prices, which lead to increase in transportation costs. The increase in shipping costs lead to an increase in price of goods, which indirectly causes inflation. The purchasing power of consumer will reduce, and this will have an impact on the GDP of the country. Moreover, higher jet fuel prices impact the aviation industry, which affects the tourism industry. Thus, enabling stable fuel supply is important for sustaining industrial growth and economic stability. That's all for our group presentation. Thank you.